Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Lauren and I'm part of the Certification and Approvals Technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations, as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approval in Indonesia. The Directorate General of Resources and Equipment for Post and Information Technology, or SDPPI, regulates the radio frequency spectrum and regulatory standardization in Indonesia, as well as the import, distribution, and sale of information technology equipment and telecommunications products on the Indonesian market. The management and utilization of the RF spectrum is carried out in an efficient manner and in accordance with the allocation plan, so as to not prevent the harmful disturbances or interference. Through standardization and government policy, SDPPI is able to provide quality guarantees to better facilitate the economic growth in Indonesia and offer the proper protection to the public. Radio frequency devices are required to be properly approved by SDPPI prior to being marketed or imported into Indonesia, and a certificate of type approval is required for radio equipment and other regulated devices to be sold in or imported to Indonesia. Vista Laboratories is an EMC RF compliance test lab and product certification body and experts in global regulatory approvals for RF devices. So, today we will be primarily going over the requirements of radio frequency and telecommunications approvals in the U.S. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for authorization and distribution in Indonesia. If you have any questions on the topics presented today, or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@vista-compliance.com. Without further ado, let's begin the presentation. So, starting with a brief overview, what is the SDPPI? Previously known as DGPT for the Directorate General of Post and Telecommunication, the SDPPI, or Directorate General of Resources and Equipment of Post and Information Technology, regulates radio frequency and the standardization of radio and telecom equipment in Indonesia. SDPPI regulates the radio frequency spectrum up to 3,000 GHz and allocates this spectrum based on international allocations for radio frequencies. SDPPI also supports the development of technology and efficient use of resources through standardization, management, and supervision of the telecommunications sector. In-country type approval testing is required as per Indonesia's own national standards, known as the Directorate General's Decree, or the SNI, Indonesia National Standard, depending on the requirements. Most of the standards are based on international standards, such as IEC ISO and ETSI. Even if the equipment has already received an internationally recognized certification of approval, the equipment must still be certified to comply with the Indonesia Technical Regulation. All post and telecommunication equipment, including radio modules and host devices capable of radio communication, are subject to Indonesian SDPPI approval, and it is mandatory for every wireless or telecom device that's produced, assembled, used, or traded within the Indonesian territory to comply with the technical requirements based on the applicable regulation. A certificate of type approval is required for radio equipment and other regulated devices to be sold in or imported to Indonesia. The SDPPI has two main approval procedures for type approval. The two ways to obtain approval are paperwork documentation evaluation only type approval or local testing and documentation evaluation type approval. Document evaluation consists of reviewing RF, EMC, and electrical safety test reports from approved labs and takes around 2 to 3 weeks. Documentation and paperwork processing is only applicable if test reports have already been obtained. In other words, testing will be mandatory for the product from the perspective regardless of what approval method is used for Indonesia. Testing is required as per Indonesia's own national standards, which follow similar national standards by IEC, ISO, and ETSI. European Union CE test reports and in some cases FCC reports are accepted by SDPPI. If the device uses AC power, then electrical safety testing is required. Approval through testing requires samples to be sent for testing in a local lab approved by SDPPI and can take between 4 to 6 weeks and requires 2 to 3 samples. Now let's briefly take a look at an overview of the approval process. Alright, so we know that RF products require approval prior to import, sale, distribution, and operation within Indonesia. Now let's take a look at the process for obtaining the approval. This process is how the SDPPI ensures that RF devices used in Indonesia operate effectively without causing harmful interference and otherwise comply with the regulations. Here we see the high-level view of approval procedure. When starting a new application, we first determine the relevant requirements, current conditions, and find out what is applicable and if approval is able to be granted. For example, right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all government entities are working remotely and new applications have been deferred. S&I audit are on hold due to travel restrictions and local testing is postponed. Paperwork processing submissions are still possible, but delays are expected. In this step, we also must evaluate and prepare the available documents such as product specifications, available test data and reports, drawings, schematics, and layouts. If testing has not been performed, we also need to ready the test sample items, supporting equipment, test software, and perform preliminary testing measurements to make sure the samples are ready. SDPPI also requires a local organization or established business to represent the applicant as the certificate holder if they have not been established in Indonesia yet. If these requirements have been met, then the next step is to perform the required testing to ensure the device complies with the applicable technical requirements and obtain the test reports showing compliance with these rules. After that, all documents are reviewed by SDPPI, and if there are no issues, the product is deemed to be in compliance, and finally the certificate is issued. Now moving on to a more detailed look at the steps involved in the approval process. Applicants begin by requesting for approval and provide the associated documentation and product specifications. The possible applicants in this case would be manufacturers or their representatives, authorized distributors, importers, or institutions or organizations using telecommunication equipment for their own operation, such as telecommunication operator, service provider, or government institution. The next part is compiling the technical documentation consisting of the product's technical specs, user manual, RF test reports and results, or reports and other documentation related to the device. If no test reports have been obtained, testing by a recognized laboratory to obtain the RF results will be required prior to starting the type approval process. Test samples and relevant documents must be submitted to an in-country lab in Indonesia for EMC and RF testing. Normally, 2 samples are required, one for the RF testing and one for EMC testing. Once the testing is complete and the reports are issued, the application can be submitted. How long this process takes will depend on the local lab's schedule, but in general, we should expect the testing to take around 4 to 6 weeks. After the completion of the equipment testing, the lab provides the resulting test report to SDPPI for further review. If the equipment tested complies with the technical regulation, a certificate will be granted. If the equipment tested does not comply with the technical regulation, the applicant will be informed in writing. The certificate is typically issued within 2 weeks. Upon receipt of the certificate, the applicant or manufacturer must affix the label and mark the certified equipment and on its packaging. The label is intended to inform the consumer of compliance and serve as monitoring purpose for SDPPI and market surveillance activities. Additionally, the applicant has 30 days to provide a picture or design of the label to SDPPI. This consists of the label, a QR code, and a warning sign that should be placed on the product or packaging. Every telecommunications equipment traded, made, assembled, imported, and/or used in Indonesia territory are required to comply with technical regulation and based on licenses in line with the prevailing laws and legislation. Here is a non-exhaustive list of regulated products and product categories for information technology equipment, internet and communication technology, as well as telecommunications and networking. It covers all wireless devices and RF technologies. SDPPI regulates radio frequency devices contained in electrical products that are capable of emitting radio frequency energy by radiation, conduction, or other means. These products have the potential to cause interference to radio services operating in the radio frequencies up to 3,000 GHz. Devices operating below this frequency require type approval by SDPPI. Here are more product types covering household, industrial, and scientific applications. In fact, there are over 50 product categories. There are certain exempt equipment, but they remain primarily for government use purposes, such as for security, defense, and other special or official services in government agencies. We had just taken a look at the products and categories regulated by SDPPI. Now we will take a brief look at the technical requirements used to show compliance with SDPPI rules. The measurement procedures can be classified as either SDPPI requirements covering EMC and RF, or SNI requirements covering electrical safety. When applying for type approval, we should be aware of what technical requirements are applicable and appropriate for the device seeking certification. Here are the latest radio frequency regulations for wireless local area networks, low-power wide area telecommunication equipment, short-range devices, cellular mobile telecommunication, and television and radio broadcast. The SNI mark is a mandatory safety mark for regulated products, and it's the only standard nationally applied in Indonesia. Here are some common safety standards in Indonesia under SNI regulation. Product testing by accredited in-country test laboratory and factory quality system control is required. Certificates should be issued by an accredited CB. Compliance with Indonesia National Standards, SNI. The certification procedure also required a submission of application and essential documents. Product testing is by random sampling and factory inspections are required. The manufacturer is also responsible for the appropriate use of the SNI mark. The lead time for SNI certification for manufacturers in Indonesia is roughly 4 months. The following are required for the testing part. 1 sample with conducted cable with test modes available and changeable. 1 sample radiated end product for EMC local test. If the equipment uses an AC power supply, another sample may be required. Instructions for testing and change modes. A radio technical declaration signed by applicant. This is a declaration of conformity of the device features and that they are in accordance with the regulations in force in Indonesia. User manual, technical specs, LOA, application forms, photos of equipment. Testing may take 6 or so weeks depending on the complexity of the product. Here are the requirements for certification. The user manual should be in English or Indonesian. Product specification, the letter of authorization from applicant or approval holder, block diagram, circuit diagram or schematics, certification forms, RF and EMC test reports, product photos, local representative and their information, as well as the agreement between the local representative or distributor and the applicant, and the label. For the label, the applicant needs to provide 2 pictures of each label, 1 full-scale image for the label, QR code, and warning sign attached on packaging or on the device, and another showing the zoomed-out image, which includes the full picture of the packaging showing the label as well as the label location. Manufacturers or importers who want to sell their products in the Indonesia market must include their label in the Indonesian language. Certifications usually take around 1 to 2 weeks. The certification process, including testing, technical documentation review, and certification, is roughly 6 to 8 weeks. New certificates are required every 3 years if the product will continue to be imported. If there are multiple manufacturers, a separate certificate is required for each manufacturer. For certification of the same products that originate from or are manufactured in different countries, even if it's the same products with the same equipment name, same brand name, same model name, and same specification, if they are coming from a different country of origin, then each will still require to have its own separate certificate. In Indonesia, certification is based on the model name and not series models or family models. So, if the product has a different model name, then it will need its own certification. Each model needs to be approved on its own, even if the differences between these family models are very minimal and if they have similar specifications. As for modular approvals, yes, modular approvals are allowed in certain cases. They must be imported and sold as a module and not as part of another device. Any end product or device with a radio module inside is considered a host device and will still require its own approval at the host level. Although it is allowed, in our experience, most labs only perform testing, and SDPPI normally only issues certifications granted at the system or host level, and the certificate is valid for each type or model number of equipment, while product or model series certificate or type approval is not acceptable. Certification labels are required for every single equipment marketed in Indonesia. After the successful approval of a product by the authority, the manufacturer is obligated to mark the product with the associated SDPPI certification label. The certificate holder shall attach the label or the mark on every certified equipment. For the purpose of the monitoring, the label shall be attached on the equipment boxes. The label is a mark that the equipment complies with the technical regulation in Indonesia, and the purpose is intended to guarantee for consumers and monitoring by the Directorate General of Posts and Telecommunications in the market. The SDPPI certification label is a pure word mark, and the label must prominently display the following two main components of information. The label, which consists of the certificate number, SDPPI, year of issuance, unique PLG or customer ID number, and the QR code. And a warning label in color must be affixed to the packaging and/or product. The QR code must be attached to each package of the device and must be in color. Please see examples shown here. The warning statement states, "No changes can be made to this device that causes physical and/or electromagnetic interference to the surrounding environment." The manufacturer is responsible to produce this label and affix it onto the equipment. The label must prominently display the components shown here. The size of label depends on the size of the equipment, and it must be visible and prominent. In situations where the equipment does not permit affixing the label due to restrictions on its placement, the label may be placed in the user manual and product packaging. The markings and lettering can be of any size or color. The warning sign is not required for SRD, such as Bluetooth, low-powered device, RFID, and NFC. Here is a sample of the equipment type approval certificate. The QR code to be placed on the packaging is provided on the bottom right of the certificate. Information such as the applicant, name, address, contact information, country of origin, equipment name, model, trademark, transmit power, frequency range, and operating frequencies will be presented here. If the product has multiple origin countries, then each country requires a separate certificate. The certificate is valid indefinitely, but a new certificate must be obtained every 3 years if the product continues to be imported. Changes to the product will require applying for a new certification. Before a radio equipment is imported or used in Indonesia, the equipment will be certified in advance. The certification is intended to guarantee the interoperability and interworking among equipments to avoid interference between equipments, protect consumers from being disadvantaged of telecommunication equipment use, and to push technology innovation in national industry. The certification of the telecommunication equipment before being imported or used can avoid loss for the party who imports or uses the equipment, primarily upon entry points into Indonesia. Imported equipment will be checked by the Indonesia Custom. If the equipment is not accompanied by a certificate, the equipment will be withheld by the custom and cannot be entered to Indonesia. Telecommunications equipment that is still made, assembled, or imported to be traded in the territory of the Republic of Indonesia after 3 years of certificate issuance date must be recertified. There is no renewal process. Local importers of equipment must be registered businesses with a business identification number and business and commercial operational license. If the product is originating from multiple different countries, they will require separate certificates. The ongoing compliance of the product will be surveyed and performed by SDPPI and its spectrum management and law enforcement sector, as well as regional trade offices and national law enforcement. Surveillance activities are performed at random, and if a device is found without a valid certification, there will be sanctions and other fines. Importation is not permitted if no certification exists after the certificate has expired. The equipment will not be able to be imported, marketed, or sold in Indonesia. There are various penalties and restrictions for different regulations. For example, an importer may be blacklisted by SDPPI and cannot submit applications for a new certification for 2 years. Certificates may be suspended due to technical or non-technical nonconformity or noncompliance, such as not following up within specified time periods or misuse of conformity label or certification. Certificate revocation can occur if the product in question is no longer produced or if insufficient corrective actions are taken or not taken within a specified time period. So, what are the rules for product changes or permitted modifications to the certified equipment? When a device is modified, a new approval and certificate is required. Changes or modification must go through a new submission and obtain a new certification. For example, if there is significant change on the physical appearance and RF specification, then we need to make a new certification. But if the change is not significant, for example, no radio frequency feature added or removed, such as only changing the certificate holder or updating the address, then this can be revised without needing a new certification. This concludes our webinar on Indonesian market access, certifications, and approvals for electrical equipment and wireless products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in understanding the process for SDPPI approval and certifications. Compliance with the technical requirements of the SDPPI is required for all radio and telecom products and ensures telecommunication network interoperability, avoid interference between telecommunication equipment, ensure public safety, and support national telecommunication industry, innovation, and engineering. All electrical equipment and devices require approval and testing in Indonesia prior to distribution or placement on the market. Vista Compliance Labs specializes in certifications, approvals, and compliance testing for electrical and radio frequency devices and is a 17025 accredited EMC and RF compliance test lab and 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and we provide certification and approvals for all product types in countries all over the world. If you would like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today, or any general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@vista-compliance.com. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.